Welcome to the Supreme Court Podcast. All opinions expressed in this podcast do not reflect the views of the Supreme Court. For clarity, the text of the decision prevails.
A 2018 World Justice Project report found that only 20% of Filipinos were able to obtain legal help. Of this number, only 15% consulted with a lawyer. In a separate survey, the United Nations Development Program identified costly services, inconvenient access, the lack of contact with lawyers, and the lack of time or awareness as among the reasons for the gap between the demand and availability of legal aid service. In an effort to bridge the gap, the Supreme Court of the Philippines from April to May 2024 spearheaded a series of consultations among the members of the judiciary, the bar, and the public in 4 key cities across the country on the then draft rules on the Unified Legal Aid Service, or ULAS. The regional consultations serve as a platform for stakeholders to deliberate on the draft ULAS rules, refine its provisions, and provide feedback and insights that were ultimately taken into consideration by the Supreme Court en banc prior to its approval on August 20, 2024. With the ULAS rules taking effect on February 3, 2025, the Supreme Court subsequently approved the ULAS Rules Manual, which among other things requires covered lawyers to provide 60 hours of pro bono legal aid services or free and adequate legal assistance every 3 years to indigent individuals. Unlike in previous legal aid rules, which focused mainly on litigation law practice, the ULAS rules broadened the scope of legal aid to include out-of-court legal services, allowing lawyers to contribute based on their expertise. The adoption of the ULAS rules is among the projects of the Supreme Court's Strategic Plan for Judicial Innovations, SPJI, 2022 to 2027, under the Target Outcome Access, which aims to enhance public access to information and legal services and to strengthen legal aid initiatives. What exactly is the Unified Legal Aid Service, or ULAS? Who are covered and who are exempted from complying with the rules? What's in it, both for indigent individuals and for members of the legal profession? Hi, I'm Attorney Mike Navallo, Supreme Court Chief Communications Officer. It's the 17th of October 2025, and today we are joined by Attorney Karl Arian A. Castillo, a member of the Interim Board of the Unified Legal Aid Service, or ULAS, chaired by Supreme Court Associate Justice Alfredo Benjamin S. Caguioa. He is also a senior partner at Fortune Narvasa and Salazar Law Offices, and he will be sharing relevant information about ULAS. Hi, Attorney Karl. Welcome to the Supreme Court Podcast.
Hello, Attorney Mike. Good day. Thank you for inviting me here.
And thanks for coming over to the Supreme Court. Now, let's start off our discussion, Attorney Karl, about this initiative of the Supreme Court called ULAS. Why is there a need for a unified legal aid service?
Well, despite the provisions of our Constitution that guarantees free access to courts and adequate legal services, meaningful access to justice for indigents and underprivileged Filipinos actually remain elusive. Mm-hmm. And you would be surprised to know that according to the World Justice Project in 2018, they found that only 20% of Filipinos were able to obtain legal help. Mm-hmm. So that leaves 80% without assistance. Of those who did, 72% turned to friends or family, only 15% consulted with a lawyer, and the rest sought help from institutions, reflecting a serious gap in public trust and access to professional legal services. Also, the United Nations Development Program survey identified the following as key barriers to legal aid. Services are too costly. Access is inconvenient due to distance. Many have no contact with lawyers. And others cite lack of time or awareness. These challenges hit hardest among OFWs, persons with disabilities, MSME and SME owners, and indigent or marginalized sectors. Hence, the need to craft the ULAS.
Attorney Karl, given that only 20% of Filipinos were able to obtain legal help, what does this mean in terms of demand for legal aid? I can imagine a lot of potential clients going to the public attorney's office or perhaps the IBP for legal aid.
Yes, well, when we were crafting the ULAS, that was one of the major questions that was asked. Are there going to be enough clients? Mm-hmm. And To tell you frankly, and private lawyers will be surprised, that from 2021 to 2023, the Public Attorney's Office served over 12.5 million clients. That's an average of 4,997 clients per attorney. Showing a glimpse of mismatch between supply and demand of free legal services. This number excludes those ineligible under PAU's indigency criteria who still cannot afford adequate legal representation. You therefore see the need for warm bodies, for lawyers to supply legal services to those in need.
So ULAS sort of wants to bridge that gap between the demand for legal representation and the actual available resources at the moment, Attorney Karl.
That's right. And I'm actually seeing the effects of ULAS as early as now. In the past, you would see the usual people go to legal aid clinics by the IBP. But because of the ULAS, we see new faces.
And tell us about this ULAS. What about the structure of ULAS? How does it look like based on the rules and the manual that have been released so far?
All right. If you first read the ULAS, it might, look confusing. But in order to demystify it so we can wrap our heads around it, imagine a diagram, a very simple diagram. On top of that diagram would be the ULAS program, where we have our manual and the rules, the advisories from the board, as well as circulars and resolutions. Under the ULAS program would be the portal. Why is it there? Because everything happens through the portal. Whether you are an excluded lawyer or a covered lawyer, you go through the portal. To get the exclusion as an excluded lawyer or to comply with the ULAS if you are a covered lawyer. Imagine that diagram has two sides. On the left side are the excluded lawyers. On the right side would be the covered lawyers. Let us first imagine the left side with the excluded lawyers. What do you need if you want to be excluded? You get a certificate of exclusion through the portal. Either through an application for exclusion or an attestation of exclusion, which we will go into detail later. So that takes care of the left side for the excluded lawyers. Let us now go to the right side of that diagram. I categorized covered lawyers into three: local lawyers, Philippine lawyers based abroad, and government lawyers. Under local lawyers would be our individual lawyers and also our registered organizations who decide to aggregate. If a registered organization does not decide to aggregate, then the members of that organization would be treated as individuals. All right? So now we have the two sides, excluded on the left, covered on the right, with local lawyers, Philippine lawyers based abroad, and government lawyers. And under local lawyers, the two classifications, individuals and registered organizations. Now we can deal with the specific requirements on how to comply with the ULAS.
And let's first discuss, Attorney Karl, the scope of ULAS. You mentioned there are lawyers that are covered and they must be required to render at least 60 hours of free legal and adequate assistance every 3 years. So what kinds of legal services are considered to be creditable under ULAS?
Actually, if we take at the rules and the manual, Attorney Mike, it's all-encompassing. Anything that involves the use of legal knowledge and legal experience to help qualified beneficiaries will fall under services that can be credited in the ULAS.
So to be concrete about it, legal review of documents is covered. How about teaching or webinars, for example?
As long as your target beneficiaries are qualified beneficiaries under the ULAS, you can do jail visitations, you can do talks on rights awareness, you can do court representation, you can do research for a particular individual who is considered a qualified beneficiary. You can help him review contracts, let him know what his rights are under specific laws, then that's going to be covered and credited under the ULAS.
And later on, we will discuss who are the qualified beneficiaries. But let's start first with the covered lawyers. You mentioned there are at least 3 categories of covered lawyers. So who are covered by ULAS? And later on, we will discuss who are exempted.
Well, essentially, Attorney Mike, all lawyers in the Philippines are covered by ULAS. We have to take a look at the rules and the manual as to who are excluded because it's easier to do it that way.
Yes.
Because the general rule is that everyone is covered whether you are practicing or not. So let's take a look at the excluded lawyers under Rule 2. There is an enumeration of lawyers there who are not required to comply with the ULAS. In other words, you don't have to submit a compliance report at the end of the compliance period. The first are lawyers in the government service and incumbent elective officials who are absolutely prohibited from practicing law outside their public employment. Namely, these are our justices, judges, and other officials or employees of the judiciary. So that includes you, Attorney Mike.
Yes,
and by the
thankfully.
way, I'm not excluded, so I still have to comply with the ULAS.
Even if you're with the interim board.
Yes, I still have to comply with the ULAS. Officials and employees of the OSG, government prosecutors, of course, the president, the vice president, and members of the cabinet. And the list goes on. And then it goes to item B, lawyers employed in the PAO. Item C, Sharia counselors who are also members of the Philippine Bar. Item D, lawyers whose request for authority to render pro bono legal aid service from their government agency was denied in writing. And so on until item H. You will notice that in item A, there is a sub-enumeration. And if you recall our diagram, which I mentioned earlier, there are two ways by which you can get a certificate of exclusion, either through an application or an attestation. Those in items A, 1 to 7, all they need to do is execute an attestation to get an
These are
exclusion.
the government officials.
Right.
Work.
Because they have an absolute prohibition to practice law outside their public office. The rest, they need to file an application. But let me tell the lawyers not to worry, because your ULAS office is doing everything it can to make this easy by providing all the forms. You will notice, for example, that in the manual, we already provided the form for the qualified beneficiary declaration as well as the lawyer certification. The other forms, we're doing our best to provide these as soon as possible so that all you have to do is accomplish them.
And hopefully, once the portal is up, you just go to the portal, accomplish the forms, and that's it.
Right. And because you mentioned the portal, Attorney Mike, we have to remember that even if you are an excluded lawyer, you still have to register in the portal. To reiterate, all lawyers in the Philippines must register in the portal. Why? Because if you are excluded, that is where you will get your certificate of exclusion.
So the only difference is if you will apply for a certificate of exclusion, or you just need to submit an attestation.
Correct.
Right. Now, what about those covered? Because earlier you mentioned you have local lawyers, Philippine lawyer based abroad, and covered lawyers in government, but who are not absolutely prohibited from practicing. So therefore, they need to comply with ULAS.
Yes.
How do they comply?
Okay. For lawyers in government who have no absolute prohibition to practice, you need to ask permission from, for example, your department head for you to comply with the ULAS. Now, if for some reason, because of an internal rule or because of your workload, that request is denied, just get a denial in writing and then apply for exclusion
Through the portal.
through the portal by invoking Section E, Item D. Lawyers whose request for authority to render pro bono legal aid service from their government agency under Section 13 of the ULAS Rules and Section 9, Rule 2 of this manual is denied by the duly authorized officer of the agency. Just make sure that the denial is in writing.
And what about if you are a local lawyer or a Philippine lawyer based abroad? Are the requirements different?
Okay. If you are a local lawyer, insofar as the services that you can provide, as I said earlier, it encompasses everything where you use your legal knowledge to help a qualified beneficiary. For a Philippine lawyer based abroad, the first thing that you need to do is have yourself classified as a Philippine lawyer based abroad, again through the portal. And you can check the manual for the requirements because there are certain qualifications for you to be considered as a Philippine lawyer based abroad. So once you are classified as a Philippine lawyer based abroad, you can render legal aid services, for example, to OFWs, but it must involve the application of Philippine law. Now, you also have the option as a Philippine lawyer based abroad. Instead of rendering pro bono work, you can give a financial contribution to the ULAS for a total of 100% of the total number of hours to exempt you from complying with the required pro bono work under the ULAS.
Let me touch on that 100% because this is different if you're based in the Philippines, right?
Correct.
You cannot pay 100% to be exempted from
that's
ULAS.
right. Okay. The general rule is that the cap is 50% of the total number of hours. we're looking at 60 hours every 3 years. And computing it at 500 pesos per hour, you can pay 15,000.
Yes.
Right? And then you can comply with
The
the
remaining.
rest, 30 hours.
That's for Philippine, those here.
For
based
local
in
lawyers.
Philippines.
If you are a Philippine lawyer based abroad and classified as such, you can pay the entire 60 hours or 30,000,
30,000
which is
pesos.
already good for the entire compliance period of 3 years.
3 years.
So that's the main difference. And since we're talking about financial contribution, again, the general rule is that you can only pay 50%. Unless you're a Philippine lawyer based abroad, you can pay 100%. But if you are a covered lawyer or a registered organization, and during the first year of the compliance period, you complete 40% of the required number of hours, you can pay 60% financial contribution. No, let's erase pay. You can give 60% financial contribution instead of the usual 50%. Because that's an incentive given to you because you completed 40% within the first year of a 3-year period.
Oh, I think that's good to know, at least for the lawyers based here. But again, what are the requirements though for lawyers based here? If they're not exempted and they need to comply, they also need to go to the portal and
Yes.
submit certain documents.
Correct. The portal is where everything happens. So all of us, including me, must register in the portal. The manual will tell us what details we need to provide to register in the portal. It's going to be the usual. Our name, roll number, law school even, and other personal details. We look for qualified beneficiaries and provide services. Now, you may ask, how do we look for qualified beneficiaries? Well, if you take a look at the manual, it mentions there the IBP, the DOJAC, as well as the law schools. The IBP has been conducting legal aid clinics for so many years. And I suggest we participate in that. Our law schools also have their own legal aid clinics. In fact, our lawyer organizations even have their own legal aid clinics. We can participate in those to comply with the ULAS.
So there are many ways to comply. I just want to touch on, because you mentioned registered organizations earlier. Are these necessarily law firms or lawyers' organizations?
Not necessarily. As long as you are registered with the SEC and you have a juridical personality. So it could be the legal department of a company. That can be a registered organization. And because we're already touching on the registered organization, what is the difference between an individual and a registered organization? Obviously, a registered organization will be composed of several lawyers. Let us assume, for example, that a law firm has 5 lawyers. That law firm is given the option to aggregate. Aggregate means to combine all the hours to comply with the ULAS. In a 5-man law office, multiplied by 60, that's going to be 300 hours.
Yes.
Right? The lawyers in that law firm don't have to do 60 hours each. The other lawyers can do 80 hours, 90 hours, while the other lawyers can focus on the clients of the firm, on administrative matters. But there is a minimum. You cannot go scot-free. So even me, even if I'm a senior partner in a firm, it doesn't mean I can do 0 hours. Because there's a minimum of 15 hours
15
for
hours.
each lawyer. So it cannot be 0 hours for the old lawyers in the firm, and then all the hours are done by the young lawyers. There has to be a compliance with the 15-hour minimum for each lawyer in the firm.
Right, and it makes sense for that setup in a law firm, because we all know that the younger ones usually do more hours and the senior ones will take a little less time reviewing the work of the younger lawyers. So it kind of makes sense in a law firm setting. But what about organizations who are partly composed of lawyers and there are non-lawyers also? Can they still be considered registered organizations? For example, there are organizations like maybe NGOs that offer partly legal service but also advocacy work. So can they be considered a registered organization?
Yes, if they have a juridical personality, that's separate. In other words, they're registered with a proper government agency. But we have to clarify, Attorney Mike, that the only benefit of a registered organization is that you can aggregate hours. That's different from accreditation of activities. Okay, because people get confused here. They think that for you to have your activity accredited, you need to be a registered organization. No.
Not necessarily.
No.
Ah.
It can be a group of lawyers. For example, the three of us want to do a legal clinic. We can have that legal clinic accredited. We don't have to be a registered organization.
So it could be individuals.
Yes, even an individual lawyer
can also
can have that activity accredited. Now, why do you want that activity accredited?
Right.
Here is the benefit. The general rule is that for you to comply with the ULAS, you need to submit certain documents. And as a continuation of my earlier diagram, one of the documents that you need to submit is a qualified beneficiary declaration. That qualified beneficiary declaration tells the ULAS office, that you're helping a qualified beneficiary. Together with that is called a lawyer certification. That lawyer certification tells the ULAS office that the lawyer interviewed the qualified beneficiary and he believes that this person is a qualified beneficiary under the rules and deserves to be helped. Now, if your activity is accredited, you don't have to submit those documents anymore. So for example, if the IBP conducts a legal clinic somewhere in Malabon, and there are 10 qualified beneficiaries who appear there, if that activity is accredited by the ULASO or the ULAS office, they don't have to submit qualified beneficiary declarations or lawyer certifications, which means it's going to be easier for them to comply.
Yes.
So how do they comply? Once your activity is accredited, the ULAS office will give you a number which proves that this activity is accredited. Now, in the portal, because we don't have a portal yet, Attorney Mike, you just need to imagine what I'm talking about. In that
Eventually,
portal,
we'll have a portal.
Yes, we'll have a portion where you can indicate that accreditation number.
I
So
see.
instead of uploading 2 documents, you just put the number.
And automatically, that portal will no longer ask you for additional documents because it's already compliant. And I just remember that we recently posted that the ULASO has given, or the interim board has given accreditation to IBP and certain organizations for conducting certified or accredited activities.
Correct.
So that's going to be a continuing accreditation for the entire compliance period.
No, not the entire compliance period. The continuing accreditation is good for 1 year. So they have to do it every
renew
year.
it next
but,
year. All right.
you know, that's a big advantage for the IBP, the DOJAC, and the law schools because of the volume of legal aid clinics that they do.
Yes.
You know, for the entire year, they don't have to keep asking for accreditation of their activities.
And also, that makes it easier for them to attract lawyers to join their legal aid clinics because they now have an additional incentive under ULAS.
Correct.
Right?
All the lawyer has to do is check the Facebook page of the IBP chapter where he belongs.
And show up.
I'm sure there's going to be a legal aid clinic out there available for you to attend.
All right. Now, let's talk about the qualified beneficiaries because this is also an important aspect of ULAS. Who are considered qualified beneficiaries and what factors are being considered or will be considered to determine if an individual is truly eligible for free legal aid?
Okay. If we analyze the manual, there are actually 2 types of qualified beneficiaries. The first type is the one where you are appointed as counsel de officio. It is presumed that you are appointed for a qualified beneficiary. It is presumed that that person needs legal help, but he cannot afford adequate legal services. Okay. So the court will issue what is called a counsel de officio order. The other type of qualified beneficiary are the indigents. The qualifications are mentioned in the rules. We can actually just read the qualifications, but essentially, it tells us that if a person cannot afford adequate legal services, then he can be considered a qualified beneficiary. And it's really up to the lawyer to determine whether that applicant for qualified beneficiary fits the criteria in the manual.
So there's not a need for ULAS to actually, or the ULASO, to look into whether this person is really indigent.
Well,
there is the trust system that the lawyers...
Yes, because we have a self-reporting system. We are trusting the lawyers to do it in good faith because you are actually going to issue a lawyer certification that you interviewed that person and that you believe that he is a qualified beneficiary under the rules and that the services that you will provide are the ones covered in the rules.
But does ULAS limit the definition of qualified beneficiaries to indigents who cannot afford? Are there also other categories of qualified beneficiaries? Like, for example, overseas Filipino workers. Can they be covered by the ULAS rule?
Yes, yes. If we take a look at the manual, Attorney Mike, under Rule 5, Section 3, there is an enumeration of the qualifications. Number one who has no money or property sufficient and available for food, shelter, and basic necessities for himself or herself and his or her family. Number two, one whose gross monthly income and that of his or her immediate family does not exceed an amount double the monthly minimum wage of an employee in the place where he or she resides. Number three, one who does not own real property with a fair market value as stated in the current tax declaration of more than 300,000. Or number four, any person including, this is the one you mentioned, an overseas Filipino worker, migrant worker, refugee, asylum seeker, and stateless person who cannot afford adequate legal services.
And going back to my question, Attorney Karl, if you are an OFW, how will you be able to obtain or secure services under ULAS?
Well, we have to remember that in our classification, in our diagram, there are Philippine lawyers based abroad.
Right.
So they can provide the legal services to you. But of course, if you're in the country, then you can go to any IBP chapter.
But it's also possible, for example, if they know someone from their place here in the Philippines, they can engage that lawyer, at least the qualified beneficiary can engage that lawyer in the Philippines.
Yes, because you can do it through Zoom. Legal advice can be done through Zoom.
And how will you document that, Attorney Karl? I'm curious if you say you just write down, we had a Zoom meeting for an hour, that will be considered by ULAS.
Because it's going to be self-reporting. Now, we discussed Philippine lawyers based abroad earlier and the difference between one who's abroad and one who's local. There's another distinction. When it comes to qualified beneficiary declaration, if you're a local lawyer, it has to be notarized. But if you're a Philippine lawyer based abroad, there's no need for notarization because we recognize the difficulty of doing that in a foreign setting.
And Attorney Karl, what about NGOs or community groups? Can they be beneficiaries under the ULAS?
Well, unfortunately, we're talking about individuals only. So it has to be a natural person.
So you can't say, I wrote a manual for this organization. It should be creditable under ULAS. It has to be an individual.
Not yet. But the current state of the ULAS is that it covers only natural persons.
And for those who wish to apply as a qualified beneficiary of ULAS, what's the process of requesting legal aid? What documents or proof do they need to show that they qualify?
Okay. The first document that you need to accomplish would be the qualified beneficiary declaration. But do not worry because the lawyer interviewing you can assist you. In fact, he's allowed to accomplish it for you while interviewing you.
Right.
That lawyer will ask you for proof of your income. So you can give your last paycheck, certificate of employment, or even a certificate of indigency from the DSWD or the local government unit. Then you tell the lawyer the legal service that you need. That's it. And have that qualified beneficiary declaration notarized.
And we're not talking about, I'm of course thinking that traditional legal aid is we go to the office of the IBP, we go to the office of PAO. But in this case, there's no such thing, required office where you have to go to, because you can actually go to any lawyer, covered lawyer, who may be able to render service under ULAS.
That's right. And that's the beauty of ULAS because it involved even the big law offices, for them to provide free legal aid service to comply with the rules.
And what about concerns, Attorney Karl? Because, of course, in this age of identity theft, confidentiality is of utmost concern. So we know we've been talking about a portal. How will ULAS ensure that the personal data of applicants and beneficiaries are protected?
Well, it's in the manual that the rule on confidentiality applies to ULAS as well as the lawyers complying with ULAS, and of course the Data Privacy Act.
And what about accountability? So what if the beneficiary is proven to have lied or to have submitted bogus documents, or if the lawyer himself or herself refuses to render the required free legal aid? What are provisions on accountability under
All
this?
right. Let's go to the qualified beneficiary first. If the qualified beneficiary lied to you that he's a qualified beneficiary, turns out he is not, then you can terminate your service unilaterally. If it's a court representation, you file that notice of termination with the court. And then you furnish the ULAS office with that notice of termination.
Right. Through the portal also.
Yes. Through the portal. If it's a lawyer who does not comply with the ULAS, there are certain penalties that will be imposed. But to go specifically to your question, I think your question is, can a lawyer refuse
Yes.
to render pro bono legal aid service? The answer is yes. Because not all lawyers are the same.
Right.
If that lawyer who was approached by a qualified beneficiary feels that he's not competent to provide that service, certainly he can refuse. But the best thing to do is to refer that qualified beneficiary to another lawyer who has the expertise to do that.
Right. So for instance, if you are engaged in corporate practice and this person requires representation in court, so you refer him to a colleague or another lawyer who engages in litigation practice.
Yes. And, you know, it's not hard to do for lawyers because, you know, we have classmates in law school,
Right.
friends in lawyer organizations.
Now, what's in it though for the lawyers? Because we've heard some complaints about ULAS when it was first discussed, and we've seen some comments online. What's in it for lawyers in complying with the rules aside from simply meeting the required hours?
Well, what's in it is that we're complying with our moral obligation to be of service to the public, which, you know, should be the number one consideration for being a lawyer. You know, a famous lawyer once said that a paradigm shift is not an event. There's a process, and we are in that process. And at some point, we are hoping, you know, the people who made the ULAS, at some point we're hoping we don't need the ULAS anymore. Because there's already a culture of service among Filipino lawyers. That's going to be the dream, that at some point we don't need the ULAS anymore. And you'd be surprised to know, Attorney Mike, that we're one of the very few countries who has mandatory pro bono. The other countries do not have. In New York, they have 50 hours, but they require it before you become a lawyer. But here, we require it for all lawyers. That's why, me personally, when we were crafting the ULAS, my thinking was to be as liberal as possible. That was my frame of mind. Because this is not an ordinary rule. This rule affects people's livelihood. Let's be as liberal as possible. Let's help the lawyers comply with it by providing all the forms. And let's determine exclusions, you know, not as a hard and fast rule, but on a case-to-case basis.
Right, because I was asking you earlier, Attorney Karl, in my case, I used to be with the media, and I'm not necessarily explicitly excluded. But what about those who are not in the list and who may fall under a gray area? For example, if I were a journalist, I could not possibly give legal advice to anyone out of conflict of interest to my profession. So what happens now to my obligation under ULAS? How will I seek exclusion?
Yes. If you will notice the list of exclusions, there's an item there, item F, which tells us that if there are other circumstances that prevent you from complying with the ULAS, then you execute an affidavit explaining those circumstances. Submit it to the ULAS office. Then the board will decide on a case-to-case basis whether you should be excluded or not.
Now, let's go to some of the issues raised about ULAS by lawyers themselves, Attorney Karl. One is that ULAS will be burdensome on solo practitioners or those operating small private practices or those managing heavy workloads. Is that necessarily the case?
We cannot deny that that can happen, Attorney Mike. But we have to take a look at the number of hours required. Remember, we are required to render 60 hours every 3 years. We're looking at 1.6 hours per month. That is something that is, you know, I think manageable for almost everyone. And we do not have to limit ourselves to court representation. Lawyers are very creative. Let's be creative in the compliance, not in the avoidance. The skill that separates a lawyer from a layman, I believe, is that we have the skill to study the law. We don't need to know all the laws. Let me give you a basic example. Study a very short law. The Anti-Bullying Act, that's barely a page. Coordinate with a public school. Give a talk to public school students who must know what the Anti-Bullying Act is. Then have it credited in ULAS. Or better yet, have your activity accredited by the ULASO so that you don't have to submit a qualified beneficiary declaration and lawyer certification. The person who helped you research on the Anti-Bullying Act, which is a one-page law, can also credit that in his reporting in the ULAS. There are other laws that are very short, and we are lawyers who know how to study the law. The Anti-Voyeurism Act, very short law. If you want a bit longer, go to the Safe Spaces Act. Give a talk about it. If you're not comfortable in public speaking, help in the research. Help in making the PowerPoint presentation. That involves the use of your legal knowledge, which is covered in the ULAS rules.
And I guess your answer, Attorney Karl, already addresses another issue. That is that what about non-litigation practitioners? What can they do? And then you perfectly mentioned some examples that even non-litigation practitioners can resort to in order to address the compliance with ULAS. And perhaps one more issue. Are Philippine lawyers based abroad required to pay 100% financial contribution under ULAS?
No. It's an option given to Philippine lawyers based abroad. But instead of paying 100%, they can do pro bono legal aid or pay 50%.
Right.
It's just an option given to them that they can pay 100% because we also recognize the difficulties that they may face.
Exactly.
Because they're based in a foreign country.
Especially if there are few Filipinos in that part of the world. Right. And lastly, Attorney Karl, just to conclude our discussion, how will you convince lawyers who may still have reservations about ULAS to perhaps reconsider their position?
Well, at the end of the day, ULAS is grounded in community and shared responsibility. And it is our obligation as lawyers because, this privilege of ours of practicing law is coupled with obligations to society. And this is a way by which we can comply with those obligations. By helping those who are in need. Let us not forget that indigents are part of the ecosystem of justice in the Philippines. And we have to address their concerns because they cannot afford adequate legal aid.
Thank you so much, Attorney Karl, for joining us today. Very enlightening discussion about ULAS and all the complexities under the ULAS rules. I hope many lawyers listening will benefit from our discussion. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you also, Attorney Mike. It's not that complex, actually.
All right. And if you wish to read the full text of the rules on Unified Legal Aid Service and the manual on the rules on ULAS, please visit the Supreme Court website. We have a dedicated microsite on ULAS which features frequently asked questions among other materials. Now here's Tiff Atendido Beltran, Supreme Court Information Officer, for this week's updates.
From the Supreme Court of the Philippines, here's the latest. The Supreme Court has dismissed the petition to disqualify Edgar Erice from running as representative of Caloocan City's 2nd District in the 2025 elections. In a decision written by Associate Justice Henry John Paul Inting, the Court en banc reversed the ruling of the Commission on Elections, or COMELEC, which had disqualified Erice for allegedly violating the Omnibus Election Code, or OEC, over his statements questioning COMELEC's contract with Miru Systems, supplier of automated counting machines. The SC had earlier issued a temporary restraining order stopping COMELEC from enforcing the disqualification while the case was under review. In its ruling, the SC clarified that under Section 1, Paragraph C, Paragraph number 3 of COMELEC Resolution number 11046, a candidate can only be disqualified if a competent court has already found them guilty of violating the OEC or the local government code in a separate proceeding. Thus, the finding of guilt must come from a prior separate case, not the disqualification case itself. In this case, COMELEC did not observe the proper legal steps when it directly declared Erice guilty and then proceeded to disqualify him. In another decision, the SC has reiterated that a marriage officiated by a solemnizing officer without legal authority is generally void, but not if one or both spouses honestly believed that the person had the authority to solemnize the marriage. The SC Second Division, through the ponencia of then Associate Justice Maria Lopez, dismissed the petition for nullity of marriage filed by a wife who claimed that the person who officiated her wedding was not a judge, as she had believed at the time of the ceremony. The SC found that the wife failed to prove that the officiant lacked authority. Under the family code, incumbent judges within their jurisdiction have the authority to solemnize a marriage, which is one of the formal requirements for a valid marriage. Marriage solemnized by a person without such authority is void unless one or both parties believe in good faith that the officiant is authorized, in which case the marriage is still valid. The SC added that the legal presumption in favor of the marriage contract stating the solemnizing officer's authority stands without clear and convincing evidence to the contrary. SC Associate Justice Ramon Paul Hernando, chair of the SC Oversight Committee over the General Maintenance of the Philippine Halls of Justice, recently led an ocular inspection of Cebu City Trial Courts and the Court of Appeals or CA Visayas Station, who were affected by a recent earthquake. He also engaged in a dialogue with judges of Cebu City and nearby areas and gave an update on the status of the construction of the new Hall of Justice of Cebu City. He also inspected the CA Visayas Station and held a dialogue with the CA justices. On Thursday, the Office of the 2026 Bar Examinations Chairperson, Associate Justice Samuel Garlan, has announced that the 2026 bar will be held on September 6, 9, and 13, 2026. It will cover 6 core subjects and will be held in local testing centers. Bar Bulletin No. 1 Series of 2026 outlines the modality, schedule, coverage, and syllabi of the 2026 bar. Justice Garlan encouraged 2026 bar aspirants to strive with hope and grit and promised a level playing field where only competence and character will determine the outcome. Meanwhile, the Office of the 2026 Sharia Special Bar Examinations or SSBE Chairperson, Associate Justice Henry John Paul Inting, has issued Sharia Special Bar Bulletin No. 1 and the syllabi for the 2026 SSBE. The exams, which will be held on May 24 and 27, 2026, will cover 4 core subjects and will be held in 4 testing centers. Application period will be from December 1 to December 12, 2025. Justice Inting reminded aspiring Sharia counselors at law of a deeper calling to uphold justice and promote harmony in society. On Monday, October 13, Associate Justice Alfredo Benjamin Caguioa administered the oath of office to the members of the House of Representatives Electoral Tribunal or HRET. San Juan City Representative Isabel Maria Zamora, Sulu 2nd District Representative Munir Arbison, Bulacan 4th District Representative Linabel Ruth Villarica, Parañaque City 2nd District Representative Brian Raymond Yamsuan, and Ifugao Representative Solomon Chungalao took their oath. The HRET is chaired by Justice Caguioa. Joining him as members are SC Associate Justices Ami Lazaro Javier and Radil Zalameda. On October 10, Senior Associate Justice Marvic Leonen served as keynote speaker at the launch of the Free Legal Assistance Group or FLAG's commemorative book, Frontliners for Human Rights, Flag of the People at 50, at the University of the Philippines, College of Law in Diliman, Quezon City. Chief Justice Alexander Hismundo also congratulated FLAG via a video message. The book commemorates FLAG's 50 years of defending human rights in the Philippines. The FLAG, led by Interim National Chairperson Attorney Theodore Te, had earlier presented a copy of the book to Chief Justice Alexander Hismundo at the Supreme Court in September. Saj Leonen was a member of FLAG from 1988 to 2012. You are now up to date with the Philippine Supreme Court. I am Tiffany Beltran, Supreme Court Information Officer.
And that's our podcast this week. Join us again next time for a detailed discussion of select cases decided by the Supreme Court. I'm Attorney Mike Navallo, your Supreme Court Chief Communications Officer. You can catch this podcast on the Supreme Court Public Information Office's accounts on X, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify. You can also catch previous editions on our website and on Spotify. This podcast episode was produced by the Supreme Court Public Information Office with Attorney Karen Martinez, Jay Rimpilio, May Sibal, and Ramir Christopher Simbahon as researchers, Brian Austria, Don Ryan Balza, Lawrence Olanio, Austin Aliscad, and Bea Batong as audio and video editors, and Tyke Flores and Jerome Batumalaki as web editors.